My name is Nick Custer. I work for the University of Michigan Flint's Office of Economic Development, and more specifically the Innovation Incubator. And so we are a no cost to you business and nonprofit incubator located in downtown Flint. Over the past few months, we've been trying to change our in-person workshops into a series of webinars that really kind of hit these big impactful issues that we're all going through today. My name is Nick Custer. I work for the University of Michigan Flint's Office of Economic Development, and more specifically the Innovation Incubator. And so we are a no cost to you business and nonprofit incubator located in downtown Flint. Over the past few months, we've been trying to change our in-person workshops into a series of webinars that really kind of hit these big impactful issues that we're all going through today. So again, welcome everybody. If you don't know, Joe is an accomplished professional in the fields of downtown redevelopment, community and economic development, Main Street, and placemaking. His work includes executive management, professional financial structuring, evaluation, fund development, foreign direct investment, project management, public speaking, and of course, consulting. Over his 20-year career, he and his teams have used state and local incentives to leverage more than $2.2 billion in private investment into communities. Joe is a principal of the consulting firm Place and Main Advisors, LLC, which he co-founded with his wife, Kirsten. Place and Main Advisors specializes in economic development, downtown revitalization, and community marketing. Their firm offers services to communities, statewide organizations, Main Street coordinating programs, and local downtowns and commercial districts. He's been the featured keynote speaker at statewide downtown conferences in Louisiana, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Delaware, a multi-time presenter at the National Main Street Now conference, and was a featured speaker at the White House Placemaking Summit in 2016. Joe is a certified economic development finance professional, and he earned his BBA at the U of M Flint. So we're very proud to welcome you, and I'll let you take it away, Joe.
Thank you. And I also appreciate the reminder. I need to edit that and get it a little bit smaller than, than what it currently is. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We have a bunch of information. Some of it may be new, some of it may not be, and mainly because there's been a lot of stuff that's been shared over the last 3 or 4 months. I think one of the blessings of the situation has been the shortening of the window in terms of people sharing, researching, testing out, and then sharing that information with folks. And typically it's taken years to get some of these concepts that we've previously worked in placemaking and downtown revitalization to a point where people are actually widely using them. And we've seen that cut down into literally weeks over the last, obviously over the last 6 months. So one of the blessings that we've seen is that some of the examples you've seen that you'll probably see today, you've probably seen before. But the fact that this is happening so quickly, I think, is really impressive in terms of how the industry, in particular economic development and community development, is reacting to this. So if you're a small business owner, some of this will be targeted to you. If you're a local community leader, some of this is targeted to you. So we're trying to hit a bunch of different topics here. So I want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask any questions that they might have as we go. I am not a big fan of just me lecturing for an hour and a half, so I do want some interaction as we go. And since there will be different sections, I do encourage you to ask questions as you have them. And Nick's going to kind of herd the cats here, and as we go to do this presentation. So the first thing I want to reiterate is kind of where we are currently. This was as of yesterday. In the United States, we saw about almost 40,000 cases, new cases on a daily basis. You can see back when things started back in April, we kind of had that spike and we thought, oh, this is when everything is going to happen. And then now we've hit kind of, a lot of us have been referring to this as a second wave. If you talk to the epidemiologists, what they're saying is that this is still first wave. The second wave is coming. So the long story short on that is that we should be prepared for the long haul, that this is going to be the new normal for a while. And I read an article just as recent as I think about 2 days ago that was saying we may not get to a point where we're not wearing masks until Easter 2021. And we may not see mass sporting events in the big house as an example with 113,000 people and 117,000 people until 2022. So we're going to see some massive changes and things are happening very quickly. We were just talking before we came on here that the city of East Lansing Public Schools has just canceled fall sports. Here in Michigan, football has been automatically moved to the spring. As of yesterday, Michigan State University has instructed all of their students to stay home And, in Michigan, we're seeing, as of yesterday, 477 new cases. So we're seeing little spikes. You can see here in Michigan, again, I know we have other people from around the country on this call today, so I don't want to belabor Michigan too much. But we saw this big spike early on. We've seen kind of that decrease, and now we've seen kind of that slight increase up. If we were to look at other places, say like Alabama and South Carolina and North Carolina and Arkansas, that's almost just the opposite, where it's kind of small to begin with, and now we're starting to see the larger spikes. So certainly as we go, this is going to be a little bit different for everybody. As I mentioned, here's Michigan. What I want to talk about is some of the issues that are facing business owners, and there's really two primary areas that business owners are getting hit. The bad news is that there's only two real areas that business owners can get hit. The first is on revenue, and the other is on expense. And what we're seeing with this COVID and over the last few months, the original April, May here in Michigan, where everything kind of shut down and nobody was doing anything at all. We kind of braced for that, and then we kind of have been allowed to trickle out. And depending on where you are, I know we got folks here in northern Michigan, and there's a little bit separate rules for folks in northern Michigan than there is from southern Michigan. And we're seeing kind of different rules across states. We've seen different phases. There's some states that have 3 phases, some states have 6 phases. Whatever your individual state situation is what it is. But what we're seeing across the board is decreased revenue. So we're seeing fewer customers because an automatic response in a lot of states has been to limit capacity within retail stores and within restaurants. And then we're just getting the plain old factor of people who, for good reason, are not comfortable being out. So we're seeing kind of a sharp decrease in the revenue of a lot of our small businesses. On the other hand, we're seeing increased costs. So anybody who actually is in business right now, they're having to pay for PPE and additional safety measures. Things like gloves and, all the rest of cleaning supplies, those types of things. And of course now, here we go. And now my presentation's not clicking through. 1 second, please. So those of you who know me really well, by the way, know that I literally just my computer died last week. And so I've been trying to learn a new system. All right. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So as we go, I want to talk a little bit about understanding cost structure. So if you're not a small business owner, if you are a Downtown Development Authority director or a Main Street coordinator or anything like this, we don't always tend to think of our small businesses in this way, but it's important for us to understand. So obviously, in order for businesses to have money, they have to have customers, and from that they buy, they purchase things from their suppliers, they pay rents to their landlords, and those landlords then pay rent to their banks. And then of course businesses pay their employees, and then if they've got a bank loan, which a lot of them do, they end up paying the bank. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, as we have an increase or a decrease in customers, there's really 2 areas in which there's flexibility on behalf of the business owner. So that's in terms of their suppliers. So if they're selling more product because they've got more customers, they can certainly increase their supplies. If they have more demand, they can increase the number of their employees. These are typically, this is business 101. If you've been to any intro business class, these are called variable costs. So as customer demand increases or decreases, these 2 costs kind of go along with that. On the other side, you have landlords and banks. So this is primarily your rent and or your bank loans. These are fixed costs. No matter how good business is going or how bad business is going, typically these 2 costs don't change. So if you have, unless you're getting increased capital to buy more supplies, there's some rules on fungibility there. But by and large, those are the 2 areas that you really don't have a ton of flexibility in. Now, where this really kind of comes into the profitability of the business is, and this is just a very basic formula, sales minus suppliers minus your landlord payments, minus the your payroll costs, minus your operating costs from your bank loan. That typically is where your profit is. So if we see an increase in customers, we can increase suppliers, we can increase employees, and we also happen to increase profit because that landlord and bank lines don't change. However, if we have a decrease in customers and then we can decrease suppliers and we can decrease employees, the profit decreases because again, the rent and the bank loans don't change. And that's really important as we look at this COVID situation, because we're seeing this sharp decrease in customers And, this inflexibility typically of both landlords and banks is really causing the huge pinch. And so we're seeing, if we don't think about the basic economics about how this impacts a business, then it really impacts how we can help them. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we can help them as we go. Here's an alternative model. If you happen to be a business that owns your own property, it's just a much more straight line thought to going to a bank. The two choke points in terms of profitability right now is the income on the income side and the number of sales and customers, and then the expenses. So you're seeing that lease and mortgage rate, which is in a lot of cases maintaining, and same with your bank loan or your line of credit. So those are the two areas where we're seeing the greatest amount of pressure on small businesses. So let's talk about, how you can help as a community help these businesses. There's really three primary ways. One is web-based, the second is promotion, and the third is use of public space. And the Main Street America group, if you're not familiar with them, they're a nonprofit based out of Chicago. They are a subdivision of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Early on in April, when all this started going on, they're continuing to do some great research about the impact of all this. But one of the really fascinating things that came out of this was the realization that 2/3 of the respondents of this survey to thousands of businesses across the country, in pretty much every state, they broke it down in every state, and every state's pretty close to the same, which is you're looking at about between roughly 2/3 of the businesses who are out there. Some of them it's low as 60%, some it's higher, like 70%. But roughly 2/3 of the businesses, small businesses in our downtowns and our Main Street districts, have no online component. Not surprisingly, when everything shut down in April and May, 80% more than 80% of the people lost revenues of 75% or more. So when 2/3 of the businesses don't have websites, and then they end up losing a lot of money because their physical doors are shut, we're seeing kind of the convergence of those two main issues. So we, first and foremost, we have to, and I know this sounds ridiculous to say in 2020, but we have to have businesses who are online, that are selling their product online. Because that we've entered a phase. Typically, it's always been one of those things where it's nice to have a website. People tend to think that it's nice to have a website, but when your physical brick and mortar location is closed, you have no other alternative or no other way to sell product. And we've seen some communities. We've seen some small businesses be very creative. So some of them have taken the opportunity during this time to create a website if they didn't already have one. We've seen other ones utilize Facebook, Facebook Market, or even doing kind of almost like a QVC approach, where they do like an hourly show once a week about their product, and people can essentially message in and say, I want product number 7, and be able to list some of the details from the video itself. But again, when we're looking at 2/3 of the small businesses in the country that don't have an online presence, that is a huge issue. I was talking with my good friend Ben Muldrow about this, and I gave him the analogy. I'm like, this is like the Titanic. I mean, literally, this is nothing that anybody had ever been prepared for. We've hit the iceberg as an economy. The ship is going down for a lot of our small businesses, and the internet, selling online, is our lifeboat. And it feels like to a lot of the downtown business directors and coordinating programs, like we're trying to convince people to get in the lifeboat. And that doesn't seem like a sales job you should have to do, but that's kind of where we're at. And I think in the end, what we're going to do is we're going to see those businesses who were quick to adapt and who are willing to jump on, they're going to survive. And those who don't, won't. And that's the unfortunate part. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in this idea that, man, we would really love to see all these businesses survive. And I think we would. But at the end of the day, if they're not willing to adapt, I mean, this is one of the fundamental parts of capitalism. If you can't adapt to the marketplace, then you're not going to live anymore. And I think one of the most convincing arguments that we've used is our friends over at Arnett Muldrow actually came up with this meme, which I love. If you're not going to have an online store, then you might as well put this sign up when you're closed, which says, sorry, we're closed, try Amazon instead. Because when the only way that a small business can sell its product is through the brick and mortar door front of what they have, then when they are not open, they are effectively telling everybody else just to try Amazon instead. You have to be able to, in 2020, you have to be able to sell your product 24 hours a day. And there's a million ways that you can go about doing that. And you have to pick one of them and just do it, because otherwise you're missing out on those sales opportunities. And Nick, I realize I speak very fast. And for the folks who've not heard me speak before, I do speak very fast. If there are questions that are popping up, please feel free to interrupt me at any point. I'm not offended by that at all, because I know we have a lot of stuff to cover. So please feel free to jump in if you're seeing any questions.
Okay, none yet, but this might be a good way to poke the audience and get some questions.
Please do, because it also gives me an opportunity to pause and take a drink of water.
Right. So yeah, feel free, if you do have questions, you can send them to me privately or put them in the chat for everyone. Either way is fine, and I'll make sure that they're sent up.
And if you are sending me private messages, I can't see them at the moment, so don't take my non-response as a snub. I literally just can't see them at the moment, and I'll come back and take a look at them in a few minutes. On the income side, I talked about promotion, and social media is an important part of this. Advertising, public relations as a community or as a downtown district, making sure that you are very active in this front is important, because at this point, a lot of businesses don't have the budget to be able to do the advertising that they normally would. So making sure that you're the one doing this stuff. And the nice part about social media is it's a low cost way to be able to advertise. And I want to give a couple of examples here that I think are really good. The first one here is it's downtown Jonesboro, Arkansas, which did this very simple chart and graph to be able to show which restaurants were open, what businesses were open, who was doing dining, who was doing curbside, who was doing delivery, and who might have been closed temporarily. And this actually evolved over time. This is like the fourth iteration of this chart, because essentially when everything hit, you had a fair number of folks in the closed temporarily side. So you can use this as a way to kind of market your businesses and just share that information, because that's important. Grayling, I know Ray's on the call. Ray, I think you guys Grayling Main Street program does, I think, an excellent job. They're not creating a ton of new content in this process. What they're doing is they're sharing the heck out of everything that their small businesses are doing. And this is a good example. This is from a couple of days ago from a business in downtown called the Curator. Of sharing that. If you scroll through their page, you'll see like every other one is about, one of the local businesses in downtown Grayling of what their product is that they're selling. So making sure that the communication is out there is really important. The other thing I really like is that they're doing a buy local bingo program. And it's an opportunity for kind of drive people still into the stores, those who are comfortable in doing that. And again, if you're not familiar with Michigan's geography, Grayling happens to be in northern Michigan, where it's not currently as hard hit. And so they're able to do some of the stuff, but still the idea of bringing people in, I think, is really important. This is another good one. I know Charlevoix's on the call too, so I want to make sure Lindsay gets a shout out at this. I really like this because this is a way that's acknowledging that, folks may not be comfortable, and giving them an opportunity on how they can do shopping, how they can dine, and how they can go out and experience entertainment. Just a very simple graphic showing folks that, all of our shops are willing to shop by appointment. You can shop online. If you go to their website, downtowncharlevoix.com, that they'll be able to kind of guide you to all those folks. So kind of putting that in a central area and helping to spread that message, I think, is really, really good.
Joe, we did.
So on the incomes, sorry, go ahead.
We did get one quick question from somebody on an iPhone. They were curious about how the stimulus checks have impacted small businesses.
I've not read any data on that yet. Anecdotally, I will say that I think what a lot of folks what ended up happening with a lot of those stimulus checks, I think what happened was that people were spending them for rent and for mortgages. I think it went pretty quickly. I do know that there was an effort by a number of groups, actually Arnett Muldrow and Associates, some friends of ours that we do a lot of work with. They actually created a branding called the Stimulus. It was Stimulus with the US. And it was really about trying to drive that message into, and it was open to anybody to use, to be able to customize that branding, to be able to kind of help push, those stimulus checks into the local economy. Honestly, I have not read anything in terms of the impact of that overall, but I have a feeling it was probably more than anything absorbed mostly by folks just trying to pay their monthly bills. When we had, unemployment at record highs, and you're looking at 22% unemployment as a country, I think a lot of that was getting soaked up in existing costs.
And just real quick, we had a question from Terrell Shields regarding whether the slides will be available after the presentation. I know we're recording the session, so the recording will be available on our website. And if Joe's open to it, we'll share the slides. Otherwise, you can just watch the recording.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, at the end of the presentation, I'll have my contact information. And Terrell, welcome to Michigan. I know you just came up from Alabama, so welcome to Wayland and welcome to the Great Lakes State. But my contact information will be at the end of this presentation, so if anybody wants it, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to send it out on a PDF. All right, good on questions?
Yep, that's it so far.
All right. So the other part of this is public space. And I think, to me, this has been one of the areas that have been really, really encouraging. So those of us who've been involved in downtown redevelopment and placemaking for a long time have been trying to push for more outdoor dining, for more use of public space, to create more pedestrian-friendly atmosphere. And there is nothing like a good crisis to be able to help push things like that forward. And it's been a lifeline for a lot of communities and for a lot of small businesses. What we've seen is pretty much across the board, no matter what state you're in, a dramatic reduction in the amount of the seating capacity for indoor dining at restaurants. And so the alternative has been to move to outdoor dining. And that's been a really cost-effective way to be able to do that. And you have to realize that a 50% capacity for an indoor for a restaurant will not be, it's barely profitable, I think. It depends on the restaurant, depends on the product, and depends on the margins. But by and large, 50% is right at that hover of profitability or not. So when you're at 50%, I mean, that's really tough. So in order to kind of help these businesses, a lot of communities have moved to outdoor dining as a way to do that. This was a great example. This is actually downtown East Lansing. I took this, probably about a month ago, where they had shut down Albert Street, which is not the main drag through downtown. It's one of the off streets. But there happens to be a lot of restaurants that kind of line this street. And so they shut it down. They took a lot of the picnic tables that were sitting over in one of the city parks that were not being used because they were not allowing large public gatherings at the city parks. What they did is they brought them downtown. They made sure that they were spaced out, and then they were able to utilize that infrastructure. Now they recently they opened the street back up. They took the picnic tables away because they were anticipating students coming back. And what they didn't want was a huge glom of students in the downtown doing this type of activity. So this was an opportunity for kind of full-time residents to take advantage of it. Now that I talked about at the top of the presentation, now that Michigan State has told students to stay home, it wouldn't surprise me if we see this come back because it has been wildly popular. It allows folks to distance, to still visit the restaurants, and Michigan has started to use an entertainment district law, which allows for alcohol to be consumed outside of the premises within a designated area. So I think you'll see probably more of that happen. This is Saline. This is one of the Main Street programs in Saline. As a matter of fact, they posted this picture just a couple of days ago. Almost all those other photos you're going to see are mine. This one is blatantly stolen from Saline because I think they did a really nice job. They shut down one of their streets, just like East Lansing did. You can see they have actually far more tables. I think they do a nice job of spacing them out here. It is really important to understand that, by adding this capacity, you're doing a couple things. One, you're making the business more profitable for those owners to be able to sell more product because people can do that. As a community, you're still allowing folks to get outside. I think that's been one of the really underappreciated side effects of this whole pandemic has been the lack of ability for people to kind of mingle. And so to be able to put them in a big, wide open space where we can still socially distance, but still kind of be together, I think is really important. And then lastly, it adds life. I think one of the weirdest things, I guess the best way to put it, during the first couple of months of the pandemic, and especially here in Michigan, we had everything shut down, was going everywhere and not seeing anybody anywhere. And so this at least adds life in a responsible way. And so I really like this example from Saline. And then the other example I want to give, this is Durand. This is one of our clients we're currently working with on an economic development strategy. And this is a town of about 3,500. So this is not a terribly large town. This is right outside of a coffee shop. They took essentially one parking space, and they created this outdoor dining area for the coffee shop and ice cream shop, and they do sandwiches and that kind of stuff. Not a tremendously huge building, not a huge restaurant, but it allowed for this smaller business to be able to still serve people and to increase their capacity to be able to do more. And so you can see, obviously in the summertime, it's been absolutely lovely, and it's been very cool that they've been able to add planners. So this really adds a lot of life, and hopefully this ends up being, when we see all of these examples, ends up being longer term or permanent by the time this pandemic's over, because I think it's something that adds a lot to the two communities. Alternative access is another one. This is actually, I will give you this example. This is in Jasper, Alabama. Great little Mexican restaurant in downtown Jasper. They were able to get some grant funds, and they added a to-go pickup window just outside of, so they've really rearranged part of the inside of their restaurant. And they actually have, when you walk in the door, there is the kind of the host area, and behind the host area backs up to this window, so that all the to-go orders are now next to this window, so you can walk up to the window and not even have to go inside the restaurant to get your to-go order. So that's been one of the more creative things that I've seen. Nick, every time your camera pops on, I'm assuming there's a question. So
yep, and it's actually really well tied into what you're presenting. Chris Higdon asked, have you seen downtown retailers taking advantage of outdoor space?
We have, to some extent, not as much as restaurants have, obviously. And a lot of that has to do with the individual creativity of the owners. What we've seen, a couple of business owners, actually one of my favorite ones in Durand, the flower shop, what they were doing around Mother's Day was they were allowing curbside pickup, but they would do curbside pickup and then have some of the display stuff outside of the store. So as you pulled up, you'd go, oh, that's really cool. Can you add that on too? So, we've seen a little bit of that, and really we would encourage more of that because it adds more of that street life to do that.
And continued with, I wonder if loss prevention in outdoor retail could be an issue. It
likely can be. I think one of the issues is you have to have people outside kind of monitoring to do that. And that's, to me, for retail, I think that's the only issue is the loss prevention.
Perfect. That's it.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about COVID costs. So we're seeing a lot of businesses start to use things like plexiglass to be able to separate. And I saw something, it was a meme the other day that apparently Jimmy Fallon had said, I really appreciate that the grocery store puts up the plexiglass after my cashier touches everything. So, and I just thought, the thought of plexiglass to protect you is not necessarily the case. The plexiglass is there to protect the workers. But we still have, seen businesses have to shell out that cost to have that plexiglass up to protect their their employees. We're seeing, floor markings, we're seeing hand sanitizer, all that stuff are all increased costs that none of these businesses have signed up for. The personal protection equipment, so masks and gloves, all that stuff, we're starting to see as additional costs now, especially if you're talking to personal services. So people who, stylists, hairstylists, nail salons, all that kind of stuff. If those places are open, they are taking all kinds of precautions. And one of the things I'd really encourage too is if it is a personal services, especially, I think all businesses should do this, but especially personal services, kind of the theater of making sure that people know that they're safe, that, before somebody comes in, they see you clean off the chair, they see you clean, using sanitizing materials for all this stuff. So it's part of that theater. I think that's important. One of the really cool projects that are going on down is actually in Alabama with Main Street, Alabama. And Mary down there is leading a process where they're working with, in the Jasper, they had one of the community foundations step up and help pay for this, where this is all kind of branded under Main Street, Alabama. But all the communities in the Main Street, the participating districts will get, signs like this, talking about the things that they're doing, the floor, they've got the floor stickers, spaced out 6 feet. This is actually a project that I got to help implement. So we were literally putting stickers on the ground, measuring out 6 feet, putting in the kick door plates. So these are those little plates that you screw into the bottom of the door that you can use to open the door with your foot. And then some of the public hand sanitizing stations. Nick, you got a question?
Yeah, Bernard Drew was looking for advice for a colleague who has a downtown restaurant. They're trying to expand the outdoor seating, yet restrictions have reduced the traffic for local businesses and the university to about 25% of what they'd normally expect.
So part of that is going to be letting people know that that's out there. And if you're in a university town, that's going to be really tough, because especially if the university has moved to online classes, I think that's going to be one of the hardest things. It's, I think, marketing to the existing residents and really kind of promoting the outdoor, being able to show what that's doing. And I think advocating with your local council and saying, hey, without this, we're going to be out of business. I think more than ever, we're seeing councils, I hate to use the phrase more than ever because it's used in everything But I think we're seeing councils understanding the importance of, we don't start doing some drastic things, some things drastically different, that we're not going to have the businesses that we have in our downtowns. So I think making sure that you're reaching out and advocating for that is important, and explaining, hey, this is the difference between us being open and not being open. This isn't a want, it's a need. And I think a lot of times we forget the difference between those things. I think making sure you spell out very clearly, yourself and any other businesses that are in that same boat, you guys all have to make sure you're working together and going together to talk to council and to the city administration.
And I got one more question from Mary in Gig Harbor, Washington. She says, we have encouraged outside commerce, worked with the city, and they have waived the encroachment permit fee. They still have to file due to liability, though. Staffing can be an issue to cover both inside and outside sales. We are working with our local Rotary Club to provide volunteers to help cover outdoors.
That is an awesome example, and great job, Gig Harbor, because I think that's what you're going to need to have to do is the cities. So one of them is the encroachment fee. So if you have, I'm not a big believer in having encroachment fees, but I think if you have an encroachment fee, I think waiving that is an automatic. If you've got, and I've told a lot of downtown organizations this, whatever your work plan was for the year in January, I hope at this point you've pretty much thrown that out and said, all right, what can we do now, to be able to help businesses? If it's restaurants, is it going halfway and instead of doing a facade grant, are you going halfway on railings or patio sets or something like that to be able to help them, in the next 6 months? Because I got to tell you, as downtown organizations and economic development organizations, right now is the time, and whether or not 6 months from now, 12 months from now, when funding is going to be the issue, when there's decreased funding at the municipal level and at the business level, folks are going to be taking a much harder look at whether or not your organization is worth funding. And what you're doing right now is the difference between whether or not you'll get funded in 6 to 12 months from now. So you have to be showing your value as an organization. If you're there just to say, hey, this is great, you actually have to be advocating. You have to be, spending money that you would normally be spending on other things, spending it to help these businesses right now.
And then 2 more quick comments. So Bernard Drew again, would you be aware of any relevant resources for the landlords of those downtown businesses who may aspire to be flexible with the tenant yet have their own fixed mortgage cost to satisfy?
We're going to talk about that in just a minute.
Perfect. And he just continues, the appeal thus far to help business owners obtain local regional SBA grants supplement their own cost have slowed down essentially in the last 2 weeks. And then Greg Phillips said, we were fortunate to be able to give all of our programs additional funding between $2,000 and $10,000 per program for targeted COVID relief assistance for small businesses. Have you seen anything creative COVID assistance besides the typical rent relief, payroll assistance, PPE, etc.?
We've seen a few. I know the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, they were doing grants to regional economic development agencies to be able to help small businesses. So we've seen re-granting programs in a couple different places. But some of the direct ones and Greg Phillips, by the way, is from Arkansas with the Main Street Arkansas program. And that was a really cool opportunity that they were able to take care of. But we're seeing a few of those. Michigan just recently did that. Again, it was a re-granting program. And I've seen a couple more in there. Sorry, Greg, they're not coming to the top of mind right now. If I know probably at about 1:45, as soon as we log off of here, I'll remember, and then I'll shoot you a text.
And Marcia Gaborowski, apologies if I mispronounced that, she just replied, use of patronicity to crowdfund on behalf of a community has been working very well locally.
Yes, that's been another one. I know that the MEDC and Patronicity have done that. That's been a really cool one as well. So it allows the local downtown organization to help match funds to be able to do that. That's a really cool program too.
Yep. All right, that's it.
All right, so let's talk about real estate. So this goes to the question that was just asked a few minutes ago. Now is the best time, actually about 2 months ago, if you're here in Michigan, but if you haven't tried to renegotiate yet, do it now. So whether or not it's a mortgage refinance or if it's a lease, now you have to go to the property owners and ask about this. Now, I'm going to address directly the question, which was, what if you're a tenant and you've got a small mom and pop landlord, and they want to be able to be flexible, but the bank's not, they've got a bank to answer to. That's when the two entities, that's when the business and the mortgage, and the landlord go to the bank together and say, here's our issue. And I want to talk about why that now is a good time to do that. First and foremost, we are experiencing, and by the way, I always have a deal. I like to try to work in a meme as much as I can, and this is one of my favorite ones. We are experiencing the biggest economic upheaval since the Great Depression. So this is making the Great Recession from 06 to 2010, 2011. This is dwarfing that. And one of the things that the financial industry learned during the Great Recession, and since most of the folks are probably still in that profession, was they don't want to own the property that they did from 06 to 2010 because they suck at it. And so what we're seeing now is banks are more willing to negotiate because they don't want to be in charge of all this property. So whether or not, you are the landlord directly, or if you're a tenant that's willing to work with your landlord, the banks are willing to negotiate. As a matter of fact, I got a couple of calls from friends in the lending industry early on, asking, what do you think is out there? And I said, listen, if you guys aren't willing to negotiate, then, you're going to be lost. And so I know what's been happening as well is that banks, a lot of times the larger contracts, the larger mortgages, they've already been proactively out talking to those property owners and those mortgage holders. So there might be an opportunity there where the landlord has already had that discussion with their bank and they're just not telling the leasee. So you might want to just make sure that part is covered. On the mortgage refinance, if you own a property, might be a really good time to refinance that property. Obviously, the time in which between you've bought it or you've last refinanced it plays a big role in that. But looking at refinancing is a really good opportunity because you can cash out if you have equity built up in that property, either to help keep your property and business afloat, or you can use it to reinvest into new investments, say like patio furniture, that other types of stuff that you need, or even kind of the short-term loan to yourself in order to make sure that you're still going to be able to be in business. I like to give this, it's a quick example. This is from a few years ago. This is called Eastminster Child Development Center. I was a member of the board here. We were in a really difficult situation where we saw severely declining enrollment. It was essentially the snapshot of what we're seeing with COVID, except for without COVID, without a pandemic. It was just kind of poor operations at the time. We had about $120,000 in debt, a letter of credit. We had declining enrollment. We were shutting down literally half the daycare facility during the summer because in a college town, summer's kind of the dead months as opposed to everywhere else where, when school's out, all the daycares, fill up. This was just the opposite. We saw declining enrollment. They didn't have any operating capital. I mean, it was really, really ugly. On top of it, the windows were awful. There was no air conditioning. The roof was leaking. It was just, it was a bad situation. And what we were able to do is take a look at it and say, well, this huge piece of property, which you saw a picture of a minute ago, had a mortgage balance of $150,000. And the question that I asked at the time was, all right, well, how much is the property worth? And they were like, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, the difference between what you owe and what the property is worth is called equity. And we can look at, cashing that in. So it turns out that property was valued at $650,000. And so what we were able to do then, it was refinance. We ended up taking out about $300,000 out of that equity. And then we were able to make improvements into the building itself. So it provided us with operating capital as a nonprofit. It's now been in business. This is a child development center. It's a nonprofit. It just celebrated its 50th anniversary. So it's been around for a long time. But up until about 10 years ago, it never marketed before. It just kind of was, hey, we hung the shingle out and that's what it was. So we were able to give them operating capital for marketing. We were able to give them on that mortgage refinance. We were able to give them the opportunity and the cash to be able to go and make improvements and install air conditioning and fix the roof, put a new roof on, and to do all those sorts of things. So using that equity that may be sitting there that you just haven't thought about, that this might be one of those opportunities. On top of that, we're seeing some really, really low mortgage rates, both on the residential and commercial sides. So if you have not refinanced in the last 10 or 15 years, there may be equity there, and maybe an opportunity to cash out some equity and lower your mortgage payments in that process. But again, that's all going to be dependent on your individual scenarios. The other piece of this was the idea of adding on the back end. So a negotiating tactic is not necessarily, we want you to forgive, a month or 2 months, or at this point, I'd be talking to banks about 6 months, shoot for 6, settle for 3 or 4. But this idea that you can add on to the back end. So if you've got a current mortgage with a 20-year amortization and a 10-year balloon, that if you've got like 5 years remaining and you're having trouble making those payments, then you can either refi or reset, and then add on the time you need right now to the end. And so what you do is you basically negotiate for a little bit more money and add 6 months on to your existing mortgage. Or this also would work on the lease side, is you say, you give us some forgiveness, or interest only, or there's a couple different options that you can do. But this idea that you can go and ask them, I want to pay interest only, or I want to add on 6 months to the end, and I'm willing to give you an extra % if I'm able to do that for the next 6 months, in order to forego. And we're seeing banks and financial institutions and be very creative. And obviously, the more locally controlled it is, so credit unions and community banks are being more flexible than the big national banks. But we're seeing all of those banks be much more flexible in terms of what they're willing to do, because again, at the end of the day, they do not want to own real estate. They are bending over backwards right now to be able to figure out what they can do in order to not own that real estate. And so, there's some favorable factors I mentioned already: the locally owned bank or credit union, your history with that lender. So if you've been doing business with them for 10 or 15 or 20 years, the more background they have on you and the more history, the more likely they are to be more flexible because you've been a long-term customer with them. And the one thing I want folks to remember is that this is crazy for everybody. There is no playbook right now in terms of what is standard procedure for an industry. We're all making this shit up. And I think it's really important that, we realize that the financial industries are in that same boat. And so we have an opportunity to approach them and be a little bit more creative in how we solve these problems. I think at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're not just solving your problem, you're helping a bank solve theirs as well. And I think that's where the opportunity for creativity lies. Again, banks don't want to foreclose. They don't want the property. Now, a lot of this depends on the ownership structure. So what we've seen is if you've got mom and pop, if you've got smaller owners, maybe they own only a couple of buildings, they have less flexibility. So that's the opportunity for them, for you to go to the banks together and be able to say, hey, I've got a tenant they can't pay. If there isn't a financial institution that isn't aware of the situation, having a tenant in your building is a hell of a lot more preferable than having an empty storefront, and the banks know that. So, this is that opportunity to do that. If you have the ability and you're working with a strong enough property owner, property management firm, landlord, that, because of those reduced sales and because of that pressure, what you could possibly do is, and we're seeing this happen more often, is where you're seeing negotiation on a percentage of sales instead of a fixed monthly rate. That's a little bit more rare to come by, but it is an option, and we're seeing more of it than we have in the past. And again, the idea that you can extend for forgiveness now, so that you're giving a discount for the next 6 months, and then adding that on to the back end. If you happen to be in a situation where you go into default, if you go to negotiate and you can't get anywhere with your financial institution, that you've really got two options that can not kill your credit. Because if you're in a stage of default, again, I'm not an attorney. I encourage you, if you're in a state of default, engage an attorney. But this is from what we've seen be successful strategies with other folks. So I want to be clear about that. So one of the first things you want to do in a default situation is you want to try to protect your credit as much as possible, because if this doesn't work out, there may be something else, and you'll still want to make sure you have good credit at the end. So one of the first things that you could do is talk to a bank about something called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So this is essentially giving them the building and giving them the keys and walking away from it. You don't have any equity. It's done. You're not going to be able to pay it. They're essentially just getting the building for free in exchange for not foreclosure, for not foreclosing on you. So that doesn't kill your credit. The other idea around this is the short sale, which obviously gained a lot of notoriety during the Great Recession of 06 to 2010. But this idea that you can, sell it for, essentially what you owe on it to a third party. So the difference is the deed in lieu of foreclosure is you're giving the deed to the bank. The short sale is that you're selling it to somebody else for basically what you owe on it. So the bank is willing to kind of take that loss. The other thing I want to make sure I address is not just all the bad news, that this is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity for restaurants, it's an opportunity for retail, and it's an opportunity for real estate. But as I always talk about this stuff, I always want to make sure that I do it in a positive tone. I love this Walt Disney quote about, keep moving forward. But we do it respectfully. So if there are businesses who are looking to go out of business, that you approach it a lot like an estate sale, that, this is not a normal, like a garage sale or yard sale situation where you go in and offer a quarter for something that's marked for $1. But it's this idea that you're respectful, that whoever is going through this is going through it and they've probably lost a lot of their life savings. But this idea that we're going through the process respectfully, but that there is still opportunity within that. So whether or not this is a good time to buy, if you were in a position where, maybe your landlord is in a bad situation, maybe you can buy your building from the landlord, or just, any of those other opportunities where we talk about, if somebody else loses their building, is that an opportunity for you to buy it? So property values overall have fallen in a lot of commercial sectors. Especially around areas where we're talking about comps versus income. And I want to give you an example here. My apologies, it's a little blurry of a graphic. This is commercial real estate values since April. And number one on here that's dropped 20% is malls. So we're seeing that office space has dropped 9%, apartments have dropped 10%, self-storage has dropped 12%. Sorry, this is student housing has dropped 12%. Overall, property values have dropped 9%, but there is that opportunity to potentially buy because we're seeing property values that have kind of dropped overall, especially in the last 6 months. The other opportunity is to insulate for next time. If you are a property owner, one of the things, as we learn from, the first few months of this, those businesses who don't have websites, those businesses who aren't open after 7, that as a property owner, you can offer, a discount, and it wouldn't necessarily be a discount. It's essentially charging a premium for those who don't follow best practices. So you can be creative in your leasing to say, all right, if you're going to come lease this retail shop, we'll release it to you for $7 a square foot if you have a website and you're open, from past 7 o'clock, you're open till at least 8 or 9 o'clock every night. And if you don't follow those best practices, then we're going to charge you $8.50 a square foot. So you can start to build in that insulation to make sure that your tenants are going to be protected and when something like this comes along the next time. And there probably will be a next time. That's the other thing we need to remember in all this, is that, we're seeing this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, we think. So, we don't know what else may happen in the coming years. I think if anything, this has taught us to be prepared for anything. Also, as a community, if you're looking to aid and transition to real estate, you can help market the opportunity, you can help find tenants, you can help line up the various incentives that you have. As I said earlier, you want to make sure that if you have a work plan that you started in January, that thing should probably be in the garbage by now, and looking at how you can help folks right now in the next 6 to 12 months. So that's what I have on real estate. I want to talk a little bit about succession planning, but I want to pause a second to see if anybody has any questions on the real estate side.
None yet, but we'll give them a second here.
All right.
Not seeing any, but great advice.
All right. So probably got the next 10 minutes here. I'm going to try to go through succession planning really quickly. I think right now what we're going to see is a lot of businesses looking to get out. So if these are boomers who are, on the fringe, all this stuff is going on is just kind of pushing them over the edge. So we're looking for folks to get out. They're either going to retire, or what's happened in way too many instances is people just give up. my wife and I saw this. My wife is from Ludington. There was a great clothing store that was in downtown Ludington. And they went out of business a couple of years ago, and they had, quite frankly, probably the worst sign I had ever seen in my life. It was this giant sign that went across both storefront windows that they had, and it said, "We're quitting." And, I don't know if they ever even thought about selling the business, but this idea that, as a community, you can help people who are looking to get out of the business to sell that business in order so we can keep, storefronts open and keep good businesses in business. Just because the existing owners, don't want to do it anymore doesn't mean it's not a viable business. So some things you want to think about as factors in succession is whether or not actually it is a good business. Is there profitability there, or is it just somebody who's tied up a lot of their money into a particular business? What those assets are of the business. Is it just, is there actually like machinery and equipment, or is it something that is, just based on the reputation of the owner? What the particular industry may be, the location of the facility, the location of the market, who the customer base is, all those things, the existing financing for the business, all those things factor into to whether or not a business would be good for succession. When you're looking at determining a price for a particular business, you want to look at those assets as well as the liabilities. So not just that they've got, t-shirt printing presses, but how much do they owe the bank still for those presses? So you want to look at those assets and the liabilities. You want to look at the revenue of the business. How much are they generating on an annual basis? The one thing I would make sure that if you are potentially looking at buying a business, if the owner says, well, I have two sets of books, I have one for the IRS and then I have the one that the real set of books, turn around and walk away. Because if they're lying to the IRS, if they've got two sets of books, there's nothing saying that they have three sets of books. So, you want to be very clear about that and protect yourself in those situations. There's another way of looking at our earnings multiples. So saying if they can demonstrate their amount of sales over the last 5-10 years of kind of projecting that out and trying to figure out that price, that's a way of doing that as well. And then something called discounted cash flow. So based on that cash flow, you can discount that and say, all right, so we'll pay you for 10 years worth. We think the business is worth 10 years worth of earnings, but it's discounted over time because, obviously $1 today is not worth the same as it is in 10 years. So looking at discounted cash flow is one of those methodologies. And of course, there are other factors that go into it. So market position, are they the only business that does X, within a market? What's the goodwill of the brand of the community? So the goodwill means how well is it known? Is it a brand that people recognize? And I'll give you an example. In my wife's hometown of Ludington, there's a great little pizza place called Chuck Wagon. And, you say Chuck Wagon Pizza in Ludington, and people know specifically what you're talking about. And, how everyone thinks it's the greatest pizza that's ever been, including myself, one of the greatest pizza places ever. And, if and when that business sells, that the value of the name Chuck Wagon is worth something versus just opening a new pizza place. So the goodwill of the brand is important. And then also, if you're the seller in the situation, you want to balance what's good for the business as well as you. And especially when it depends on the financing, if you're doing something that's like a land contract type of situation, that you don't want to squeeze so much money out of the business that's no longer profitable for the new owner, because then if they can't be profitable, then they're not going to pay you. So you want to balance those things between, what's good for you, what's good for the seller, what's good for the business. Finding the next buyer, that's often the hardest part. There's a lot of family businesses, and this has really happened more over the last 10, 15 years, that the family businesses have gone out of business because the kids don't want to do it. So Gen Xers and millennials have kind of turned away from doing the family business. So first and foremost, family is the easiest and fastest way to do this. And typically that's where we still see a majority of those transitions. But we're seeing more and more employees take over. So it's a longtime manager or a longtime employee who's been with the company or with the business, of them buying the business from the owner and kind of taking it over, because that eases transition as well, because they already know a lot of the ins and outs. Of course, finding a new buyer is always an option. It's, I think, vastly more difficult than going either the family or employee route, but certainly a new buyer is an option. One that people don't think about is selling to the competitors. Is, if there's somebody else who does this, or an ancillary or a complementary type of business in your community, of selling to them, because they understand the industry, they would more than likely understand the value of your business, and give them an opportunity to expand as well. So financing is a key in all this. So there's traditional financing, of course, working through the banks, contract based, which I mentioned earlier, like a lot like a land contract, which is a direct contract between the existing owner and the new owner to pay that owner over time. Excuse me. And then other considerations, if you're going to sell a business or if you're going to buy a business, the transition period of, how long is the old owner going to stay working with the company to be able to help train the new owner about how some of the things work, what the trade and family secrets are. One of the good example is a former bakery that we know quite well, that the parents sold the business, the parents passed away, the child sold the business to new owners and offered to sell the family recipes with the business, and the new owners declined the family recipes and kept the brand and kept the storefront, and ended up failing miserably because they kept the brand in the storefront but not the recipes, and they had a completely different tasting product than what they did previously, and that business ended up going out of business. So this idea around the trade and family secrets, making sure that those are included, and then of course a non-compete clause. You want to make sure that if you're buying a business from somebody, that they're not going to turn around and take your money and within 6 months set up shop across the street and take all their old customers with them. So making sure that you've got non-compete clauses in there. And then lastly, I want to talk about some of the additional resources. There are a couple I think that really merit looking into if you haven't already. The reopenmainstreet.com, and if you're in Michigan, the Michigan Main Street program, Laura I know is on the call, has done a really cool job with working with Jay Slinsog from Downtown Professionals Network, who created Reopen Main Street as this incredible online guide, and in Michigan, it's the Michigan specific one, about all the different resources and ideas for businesses and property owners and leaders to be able to spend. You can spend literally a day on this website of checking out all this stuff. If you have not used it, I highly recommend it. The other one in this is the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ISLR, and Kennedy Smith, a long-time respected leader in downtown revitalization, recently published the 26 actions local leaders can take to help small businesses weather the pandemic. Everything from helping waive some of the local fees to really, really good resources in Reopen Main Street and ISLR.org. I highly recommend those if you're looking for other ways to be able to help your local businesses. And then also we're part of a group called Proud Places, so proudplaces.com, and also you can find us on Facebook. We also happen to have a group called the Downtown Happy Hour, which some of you I know are members. If you go onto Facebook and look for Downtown Happy Hour, it is a great resource in a community where we share a lot of the best practices and cool stories and cool ideas of things that we see. And we started this honestly, at the start of the pandemic as a way to just kind of get together and have a beer virtually and talk. But it has really evolved into a community that kind of helps one another across the country. And we've even seen people come in from across the globe. So those are a couple of different additional resources. And then lastly, if you have any specific questions about the presentation today, my email and my phone number are on this slide, as well as our social media channels. And please feel free to reach out, and happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. This is an amazing presentation. I know just in the comments, we got a lot of people just saying, thank you for doing this. Excellent summary on succession planning, things like that. I definitely know that I learned a few things, and I hope everybody else did. Now would be a good time if you do have additional questions to put them in the chat. We can make sure that Joe answers them here in the last few minutes we have together.
I'm just now scrolling through, so if you've sent me a message or anything, I'm just now scrolling through trying to make sure I'm catching up.
Thank you, Joe. Very informative. All my best from Wes Craiglow. While we're doing that, I'll just quickly let anyone know that's interested in receiving some of our services. If you are starting a business or a nonprofit, especially if you're in this region of Michigan, the Thumb. And actually, while I'm doing that, can you share your contact info one more time, Joe?
Yeah,
in the chat. And one more question here. Where can we find Kennedy's 26 actions list?
It is the ISLR.org website, and I think it's on the front page there.
Perfect.
Sorry, I'm trying to get back to my share page here. Hold on.
And so his contact is there. phone number, email, web address, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think it's, if I believe if I remember correctly, Bryce Airgood had a question. So moving forward, what is the main piece of advice you give to small businesses who want to survive the pandemic, and what do you suggest local governments can do to help them during this time moving forward with this new normal?
I would say stay flexible as possible. And it all depends kind of, because small businesses is a really kind of broad category, but I would say to stay flexible as possible. I think one of the cool things that we saw early on with the pandemic was, places like distilleries, that rely on people coming in the door. And when we were shut down for 2 months, what they all do, they turn around and start making hand sanitizer. So, I mean, looking at ways that you can, twist your business, twist your skill set, twist your assets, and to be able to pivot to something else if you need to. But above all that, if you're not selling online, my God, get online like yesterday. You have to be able to sell your product online, and you have to be able to do that. If you're a local leader, if you want to go to your local leadership, elected leaders in the public sector, try to figure out ways that those existing organizations can assist, whether that's turning facade grant money into helping to create more interactive public spaces to allow things like outdoor dining or outdoor retail, or just being able to help to bring folks responsibly into the storefronts into your community. I think that's going to be the hardest part, is trying to figure out, based on where you are, what that responsibility looks like.
Bernard Drew asked, any thoughts on securing capital to purchase a business that may be losing revenue due to COVID-19 and has substantial potential post-pandemic? Clearly present P&L and cash flow will not be favorable for typical lending guidelines. Will that be an exclusive play space geared towards those with liquidity versus the financeability?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say, I mean, if it were me, if I was in that situation, I would look at, almost pre-COVID P&L versus post-COVID P&L, and then be able to talk about how you're going to address post-COVID P&L. Because right now, we're not post. We're still, I don't know what the word is for during, but we're still in the middle of all this. And I think if you can be able to say, here's how we're going to address that becomes a lot more viable. What you're probably going to see is an increased demand from the financial industry for increased equity. So they're not going to finance 80% or 90%. They're going to want to feel like that they can get their capital out of it if things go belly up. So they're going to want to see you probably bring 50% equity. So, maybe it's partnering with other potential suppliers or customers, or, even crowdsourcing, at looking at some of those other options to be able to help raise equity, because the less you can finance, the better off you're going to be in terms of being able to get that financial commitment. Because right now, banks are really concerned about being able to get their money back.
So thank you for that answer. Any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. While we're doing that, I also just put in the chat that if anyone's interested in receiving any no-cost business counseling services from us at U of M Flint, everything is done online at the moment. You just go to the link I provided in the chat, go.umflint/bright idea, fill out a quick 20-question intake form. That gets you in our system, and then our counsels will reach out to you and schedule a meeting. Mary from Gig Harbor just says, thank you as always for a great presentation. We're getting a lot of praise for how wonderful this was. But I'll just put it out there one more time. If you do have a question, if you still have some unanswered thoughts, or you think everyone could benefit from that, please put it in there now. Otherwise, of course.
Nick, I want to point out real quick. Hi, Kennedy. I didn't realize Kennedy Smith was actually on this call. Kennedy actually put the link for that the 26 action local leaders can take in the chat. So make sure you scroll up and find Kennedy's comment. So thank you, Kennedy, for posting that.
Perfect. Jen says, great info. Please advocate for federal support to local governments so they can assist small businesses. I think that's what we can all be working towards.
That's generated, by the way. Yeah, talking with Michigan Municipal League is a great partner for our downtowns and for our small businesses as well. You would think with a name like Michigan Municipal League that they are solely focused on municipalities, and that's a big part of who they are. But they understand the importance of having quality places and quality businesses that make our state more attractive.
So any final questions? I'll just kind of keep saying it.
And again, if there's something else, there's, obviously our contact information is there. If you're anything like me, that we're, at about 5 minutes after this thing closes, you'll go, crap, I should have thought about that and asked him that. Please feel free to reach out. And, again, you guys have done, Nick, thank you for having me. And you guys have done a fantastic job of promoting this. And they've been linking to us. So if you don't currently like the U of M Flint Office of Economic Development, go onto their Facebook page, make sure you're liking them. And they're obviously linking to us in some of their posts and vice versa. So please feel free, and please do go out and support U of M Office of Economic Development as well.
Appreciate that. One question here from Brad Garman. I work in an industry that thrives on face-to-face work, fitting in a backpack, etc. How does online fit into that model?
Honestly, I think that's going to be one of the hardest things. Are those highly specialized, I think, tailored clothing. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff that I think is going to be very difficult. But again, being able to do that by appointment and making sure that the businesses who have that are using proper PPE, and giving folks a sense of security and all that. I think it can be done. It's just going to require, I think, a little bit more thought. And I do think that, the idea of having a scheduled appointment where you're not one of 50 people in the store, you might be one of 5 people in the store. That's going to require that. So I don't think face-to-face is going to go away, but it's really going to be changing. It's going to be mask to mask, and it's going to be, in a far more, spaced out type of way.
I'm sensing that's probably the last question. But again, just really appreciate everyone's time today. Wonderful presentation. If you have any additional thoughts, again, that come up, you can get a hold of Joe at placeinmaine.com or visit him at the website and learn more about their services. One quick thing from Sarah Edwards: the ability to book appointments online and having some expert tips and value on a website would be a great addition if they're not currently online at all for that face-to-face.
Absolutely.
So that's my favorite, when you get some of the crowdsourced answers as well and kind of work together.
And there was a lot of interaction on this, and my apologies for not being able to kind of see it as I was presenting, but that's one of my favorite things. I've been really impressed since all this has started that, doing webinars has always been difficult. But I think once everyone realizes kind of we're all in the same situation, the amount of engagement that's happened around webinars, I think, is vastly changed than where it was, 12 months ago. So I really appreciate everyone here being as participatory as you have been, because that really, I think, makes a lot of this easier for myself as a presenter, and makes it more worthwhile for the folks who are participating with us.
Certainly. And with that, I just appreciate everybody's time today. Again, we have your contact, so you will be probably informed of future workshops and webinars we'll be doing. We hope to bring back dynamic speakers, maybe not as dynamic as Joe here, but we'll do our best. And again, thank you for your time, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.